arrival at the resort. I just needed a break. Nothing dramatic, just space to breathe, to think, to stop waking up every morning with that weight in my chest. So I booked a trip. A quiet coastal town, almost like an island, hidden away from noise and deadlines. No crowds, no rush. Just sea, sun, and silence. From the moment I stepped off the bus, I felt it. Calmness. The town was beautiful in that postcard-perfect kind of way. Cobblestone streets, local cafes with string lights, waves brushing the sand like a whisper. Everything was slow here. Peaceful. Exactly what I needed. I checked into a small guest house run by a kind elderly couple. They gave me the top floor, a room with a view of the ocean. I remember standing by the window, watching the sunset dip behind the horizon and thinking, this might finally be the place where I can rest. But now, looking back, I should have listened to that little voice in my head, the one that whispered, too perfect is never safe. A tourist goes missing. It started on the 6th day. The morning was like all the others. Sun pouring through the curtains, warm tea on the balcony. That slow, peaceful rhythm I was finally starting to settle into. The kind of morning where nothing should feel wrong. But when I went down to the local cafe for breakfast, I noticed the owner, a woman who'd been all smiles and stories since the day I arrived, was quieter than usual, tense. She kept exchanging glances with the young guy behind the counter, whispering just low enough for no one to catch more than a word or two. I thought maybe she was just tired, maybe something personal. Still, I asked if everything was okay. She gave me a stiff smile and said, all good. Just a strange kind of wind today. That answer stuck with me. It didn't sound like nothing. Later that day, as I walked past the beach, I overheard a conversation between two locals. Quiet, serious. Just vanished. Her things were still there, purse, phone, even her sandals. They were talking about a young woman, a tourist, staying not far from my guest house. She disappeared overnight. No witnesses, no goodbye, no sound of her leaving. Nothing. Just gone. At first I assumed the usual. Maybe she left unexpectedly, got in a fight, booked a last-minute ferry, needed space. Happens all the time, right? But the details didn't add up. The police came, talked to the guest house owners, checked the room. But everything wrapped up too quickly. No announcements, no public calls for information. It was like she'd never existed, like someone had quietly folded her name out of the story. And the locals, they didn't want to talk. They kept smiling, kept moving, like forgetting was part of the routine here. That was the first moment I felt it. Deep in my gut, something wasn't right about this place. Not at all. The second disappearance. On the 7th day, I heard about the second case. A young guy, the kind you'd see on the beach alone, headphones on, camera slung over his shoulder, just vanished. I'd noticed him a few times. Quiet, observant, always capturing little things around the island like they meant something more. Then one morning, he was just gone. His stuff was still in his bungalow. Camera, backpack. Even the keys to the bike he always rented were lying neatly on the table. Everything in its place, as if someone wanted it to look unremarkable. The woman running the bungalow shrugged it off. He probably left early, she said. Some tourists don't say goodbye. But I remembered clearly. His rental bike had been parked under the awning all morning. He didn't leave. At least not the way they said he did. Something about this disappearance felt eerily familiar. Too tidy, too clean. Like it had been brushed under the rug before anyone could notice. Later I brought it up to a local guy I'd chatted with at a bar once or twice. You hear about that photographer? I asked. His whole posture changed. He looked away and muttered, tourists come and go. Hard to keep track. That's when I realised no one wanted to talk. It wasn't just avoidance. It was silence. Willful, practised silence. Like a rule everyone knew not to break. I spoke to the woman who cleaned the photographer's bungalow. She barely glanced up when she said something I'll never forget. People disappear sometimes. Especially here, you just keep breathing. Don't ask questions. She said it like it was normal, like she'd said it before. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a coincidence. That guy didn't leave, and no one wanted to admit that he was gone. Within days, the story faded. It was as if he'd never been on the island. No one mentioned his name. No one searched. No missing posters. No police inquiry. It was like the island had quietly absorbed him, and that was that. I searched for him online. His social media hadn't updated since a photo posted just before he vanished. A sunset over the bay. The caption read, "Perfect place. You could get lost here forever." I felt a chill crawl across my skin. It didn't sound romantic anymore. It sounded like a warning. That night, I sat alone on the terrace, staring at that same horizon. The beach was deserted. The breeze barely moved the curtains. The air was thick, damp and far too quiet. I tried to remember his face, not from the picture, but how he really looked. Focused, a little distant, like someone who had just started to put the pieces together. Maybe he saw too much. Maybe he realised the truth, just a little too late. And that's when something shifted in me. I wasn't just a visitor anymore, I was a witness. Maybe the only one left paying attention. The second disappearance and rising unease. A few more days passed. I kept trying to convince myself that the first disappearance might have been a fluke. People go off the grid all the time, especially on vacation. Maybe she'd just decided to vanish for a while. Turn off her phone, forget the world. But then, Emma disappeared. She was young, cheerful, easy to talk to. I'd seen her often at the cafe by the beach, always at the same table, sipping fresh orange juice and writing postcards. We'd exchanged a few words here and there. Nothing deep. She was just normal. So normal that the idea of her simply vanishing felt wrong. One evening, I walked into the cafe, expecting to see her in her usual spot. The chair was empty. The next evening, me, still empty. I asked the waiter casually, "Hey, the girl who used to sit here, she okay?" He looked at the table, shrugged. "Think she left early yesterday morning." I blinked. "Alone?" Didn't see her with any bags. He gave a half smile. People leave. Happens. That's when the real fear kicked in. The same pattern, same vague answers. Another sudden quiet departure. And again, no noise, no concern, no one asking where she went. At her hotel I tried digging. All they had was her name. No emergency contact, no phone number, no checkout time. That's when I started really watching, and I noticed something else. Every time someone disappears, the staff reacts the same way. Calm, too calm, like they've rehearsed it. Like it's routine. And the locals? I used to think they were just friendly. But now I saw it. They were silent. They didn't ask questions. And if you tried to bring up the disappearances, their eyes would drop. And the conversation would die mid-sentence. This wasn't coincidence. I knew it now. Something was wrong here, and someone, or something, didn't want us asking questions. Or maybe didn't want us leaving at all. Suspicions and strange behaviour. I started watching people more closely, their body language, the way they smiled, the way their expressions changed when certain topics came up. I was trying to make sense of everything, hoping something, anything, would explain what was happening here. But instead of answers, I began noticing her. She wasn't someone you'd immediately remember. Polite, neat, mid-40s maybe, with a soft voice and perfect manners. Always said hello first, always asked the right questions. Always happened to be in the same place I was, at the cafe, on the path near the cliffs, even at the small convenience store in town. She introduced herself as Mrs. Ellen, told me she'd been coming here for years. 9th year in a row. Feels like home now. On the surface, it sounded harmless, but the more we crossed paths, the more I felt something was off. Her presence was too polished, too scripted. She never shared anything truly personal. Even when she spoke, her words felt rehearsed. Like, this island gives everyone what they need. Or, you just have to let go of heavy thoughts. Here, it's all about rest. Only rest. One evening we ended up talking by the beach. Seemed casual. Small talk. But then she mentioned my hotel. The exact one. I hadn't told her. She knew I'd had dinner at the cafe near the docks. The night before. And worse, She knew the names of the missing tourists. I half joked, "Strange how people just vanish around here and no one seems to care." She smiled, calm, almost tender. Maybe they don't want to be found. That was when it hit me. She wasn't just another tourist, she knew too much. And she was way too calm about it. Too perfect. Then, with a quiet voice that sent a chill through me, she added, "Sometimes people leave without ever getting up." I didn't know if it was a warning or a threat, but I knew one thing for sure. Mrs. Ellen was not what she seemed, the midnight discovery. That night I barely slept. Not out of fear, not exactly, but because I couldn't stop thinking. About her words, about how everything seemed to shift the moment she started appearing everywhere. My mind looped through snippets of conversations, strange pauses, glances that lingered a bit too long. I needed something, proof, a reason to trust my instincts. So I went for a walk, just to clear my head. It was well past midnight. The beach was deserted. The air felt heavier than usual. Streetlights flickered. Palm tree shadows fell too perfectly, like they'd been placed there. I wandered toward the old pier. Tourists rarely went that way. It was too run down, too eerie, which made it the perfect place to think, to breathe, and maybe to find what I wasn't sure I was looking for. That's when I saw it, near the base of the pier, half hidden beneath a warped plank, a small mound of sand, uneven, freshly disturbed, like someone had dug, then quickly tried to cover their tracks. I knelt down, brushed away a few layers with my hand, and felt fabric. It was a cap, black with an embroidered logo. I recognised it immediately, Josh's, the guy who disappeared first. He wore it constantly, said it was a gift from his sister, said he never took it off. I looked around. The beach was still. The breeze had stopped completely. Just me. And the cap. Hidden, not dropped. Not forgotten. Hidden. Inside, on the label, was a dark stain. I told myself it could have been seawater. Or oil. But I knew. It wasn't. I shoved the cap into my backpack and walked away as fast as I could. Every step faster than the last. My pulse was pounding in my ears. Someone was hunting. Not watching. Not warning. Hunting. And maybe they'd done it more than once. That cap wasn't just evidence. It was a message. And now that I'd found it, I was sure of one thing. They were watching me now. The search for answers. From the moment I found Josh's cap, something in me shifted. This wasn't a vacation anymore. It wasn't about escaping routine or clearing my head. This became personal. Because if I hadn't walked that beach that night, if I hadn't stopped at that exact spot, no one would have ever known. I started digging, literally and metaphorically. First, the guest lists. That was tricky. The hotel receptionist, all polite smiles and scripted cheer, didn't want to share anything. But in a back corner of the staff area, I found an old laptop left open, a spreadsheet, names, check-in dates, but no checkout records. A few names didn't have any exit logs. Josh was one of them. So were two others. I cross-referenced them with the photos on the welcome board near the lobby. A few familiar faces were just gone. No farewells, no announcements. Like they never existed. I made my way to the local police station, just a 10-minute walk from the centre of town. A tiny building, 2 officers behind the desk, and a sense that the whole place was more for show than for function. I told them what I'd found, at least 3 missing guests, no signs of departure. I even showed them the cap. The officer just nodded, didn't take notes. "People leave all the time," he said casually. "Some don't tell anyone. That's the kind of place this is. Relaxing." Relaxing. The word stung. It felt like a joke, but the look in his eyes, that haunted stillness, and told me everything. He knew. He just wasn't going to do anything. I left the station with a knot in my chest. It was obvious now. No one in charge was going to help. This place, something was wrong here, and everyone was pretending it wasn't. Back at the hotel, I started reviewing the security footage. One of the cameras faced a small private trail that led out toward the cliffs. A few days ago, Josh had walked that path. Alone, he never came back on camera. But someone did follow him. A woman. The same woman I'd already noticed too many times. Too perfect. Too polite. Always alone. She followed him at a steady pace. A few minutes later, the camera glitched. Cut out. My blood turned cold. Now I had motive. I had a suspect. I even had proof. The kind no one wanted to see. And only one question remained. Why is no one doing anything about it? Revelation. I couldn't pretend anymore. It wasn't just a hunch. There were too many coincidences, too many signs, all pointing in one direction. Her name was Marie. According to her paperwork, a solo traveller, booked for 2 weeks. No baggage, no companions. She seemed like the perfect guest, polite, cheerful, always helping the staff, handing out fruit, joking with kids by the pool. Too perfect. I started watching her, at first from a distance, in the restaurant. By the beach near the pool, she had a routine. Always arrived alone, always struck up conversations with someone new. Usually with tourists, especially the ones who looked new. And then, they'd disappear. Quietly, without a trace. But her smile never changed. One evening I decided to speak with her. She was, as expected, charming. Laughed at the right moments, asked thoughtful questions. But her eyes weren't warm. Not even a flicker. Just calculating. Watching. Like she was deciding if I was a suitable target. "Is this your first time here?" she asked. "Yes, and it looks like I might be staying longer than I planned." She tilted her head slightly, as if hearing the fear, not the words. "Oh, this place has a way of keeping people," she said. "Some never leave." My stomach turned. It wasn't a comment. It was a warning. Or maybe a threat. Later that night, I snuck to her room. The door was slightly open. She was asleep. Or pretending. I stepped inside, holding my breath. Her place was neat. Nothing in the drawers. Dresses hanging perfectly. But behind the lining of the wardrobe, I found it. A map of the island, marked with paths, trails, and tiny red X's that led to cliffs, remote beaches, places you wouldn't just stumble upon. I took a photo and left. That's when I knew she had to be stopped. Because no one else would. No one else even believed. And maybe I was next. She chose the quiet ones, the solo travellers, the unnoticed, and she'd done this before. The next morning, I sat with a cold coffee, mind racing. All I had were some blurry photos and gut instinct. No proof, no witnesses. But everything in me screamed, this wasn't paranoia. This was real. I started asking questions. First, a security guard. Carefully, not too direct. I asked if he'd noticed anything strange lately. He shrugged, but his voice dipped. "Yeah, people go missing here all the time. They say not to interfere. Private business." I realised I needed help, someone who knew more than they let on. I remembered the older woman staying in the room next to mine. She'd been coming to this place for years. I sat beside her by the pool and asked quietly, "Do you know Marie?" Her smile faded. "I wouldn't get too close to her," she said softly. "There've been stories, but no one talks about them, because nothing ever gets done." That's when I understood. This wasn't just a string of disappearances. It was a system. Or a game. Maybe both. I started tracing it all. The dates, the names, the patterns. Every single one of them had contact with Marie. Some for a few hours, some for a day. But after that, gone. Then the moment came. I approached her again. Evening. Beach. She was sipping wine. "I think you left something in my room," I said. "A map." She didn't flinch. No denial. No fear. Just smiled. Calm. Confident. Like she wanted me to know. "Sometimes," she whispered, "people aren't meant to leave." The next morning, she was gone. But this time I'd left a copy of her map with the hotel manager and sent an anonymous tip, photos, names, everything, to the local police. Within days, the island buzzed with rumours. They'd found a house, old, on the edge of town. Inside, things they wouldn't comment on publicly. They were looking for her now. Marie. But no one knew where she'd gone. And me? I left. But her eyes, her look, stayed with me. Like the game and was only just beginning. The confrontation and the escape. I knew this could go badly, but walking away would mean letting it happen again. After everything I'd seen, letting her disappear now would be signing someone else's sentence. I spotted her 2 nights after I'd handed over the evidence. There she was again. At the bar. Calm. Smiling. Dressed in white like nothing ever happened. Beside her, a young tourist. New. Just arrived. He was laughing, completely at ease, unaware that she was watching him with that same quiet precision, like a predator sizing up a meal. I knew I didn't have much time. I followed them. They walked down the trail that curved toward the hills, a path no one used at night. I kept my distance, careful not to make a sound. The moon lit the way just enough. When they stopped at a small shack, barely visible from the road, I moved closer. Then I heard her voice. "Just step inside. I'll show you something beautiful." The guy chuckled. The door shut behind him. I didn't know what I'd find, but I stepped in after them, quiet, cautious. Inside, it was nearly empty. A lantern hung from the wall. In the back, a staircase led downward. Her voice floated up, colder. Cold now. Commanding, I ran. At the bottom, a concrete room, damp and silent. He was tied to a chair, alive, shaken. And she was standing next to him calmly. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. "You again," she said softly. "Shame. This could have been cleaner." I didn't wait. I rushed her. We struggled, stumbling, grabbing, fists and elbows. She was stronger than she looked. But adrenaline carried me further. I managed to knock her back with the lantern. She hit the floor, unconscious. I untied the guy. He was disoriented, but okay. We scrambled out together. Within 30 minutes, the police arrived. The files, the photos, that place. It was enough. They had been looking for her. Now they had everything they needed. They arrested her without a word. Only I noticed her final glance. It wasn't anger, not even hatred. It was curiosity. Like I was a rare case, a surprise move in her game. She didn't resist, she just smiled. And I realised this had been a game all along. This time she lost. But she looked like someone waiting for the next round. Later, after the interviews, paperwork, and drawn-out silence, I sat by the shore. The quiet was unsettling. Not like the dead stillness of that basement. This was normal quiet, which somehow felt worse. Like nothing had happened. Like the nightmare had never touched this place. But it had touched me. They took her away the next morning. I didn't ask where, I didn't want to know. One look at her face was enough. She wasn't worried about trials or cells. She already had a plan. Maybe not today, but someday. The guy I saved left that night. No goodbyes. I didn't blame him. Some memories aren't worth keeping. I stayed one more day, just to breathe, to convince myself it was over. But I noticed the stares, not of gratitude, not awe, just quiet eyes that said, "You saw something we all knew," but never wanted to admit. People here had always whispered about disappearances. They just didn't want names, didn't want truth. And now that the truth was out, they just wanted it gone. I packed my bags, dropped my keys at the desk, left on the first boat out. No farewells, no postcards. Just that lingering feeling that someone was still watching me. Not paranoia, not fear. Just the quiet knowledge that even when you find answers, it's not always over. Sometimes evil leaves. Sometimes it pretends to sleep. And sometimes it sits next to you on the boat, smiles, and slips the mask back on, looking just like everyone else, and you won't know who it is until it's too late. Final chapter, bittersweet ending. It was over, but the feeling of victory never came. She was taken away. The police opened an official investigation and, as always, tried to present it as an isolated incident. People returned to their strolls along the waterfront. Tourists took pictures against the glowing sunsets. Locals smiled a little wider, as if trying harder to forget. But I couldn't forget. Every morning I wake up with the same thought. What if I hadn't noticed? What if I hadn't found that thing buried in the sand? How many more would have vanished before anyone cared to see the truth? Sometimes I still hear her voice. That calm, gentle, caring tone. The same lines she used to say with a smile. But now they echo differently. Ominous. Distorted. This place looked perfect. A paradise in Kodamawa. A quiet escape from the world. But now I know, even the sunniest island can cast a shadow. And it doesn't always wear black. Sometimes it wears bright dresses, warm smiles, and asks, "First time here?" I left, and I wish I could say I left it all behind. But the truth is, some things don't stay behind. They live inside you. Now, when someone says, "Let's go somewhere and relax," I just shake my head. Because I know better now. Even in paradise, someone is always watching. And maybe, just maybe, they've already chosen who's next. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new creepy tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. We value your opinion. Bye for now. See you in the next video.